Are you telling me humans have just been observing this entire time? The room dropped into a heavy silence as General Corvo of the Zin Consortium stared at the glowing holographic map. Every other species within the intergalactic coalition had already thrown their full weight behind the war, depleting their reserves and manpower in a prolonged and bloody struggle against the Qadari. And yet, in the background, humanity had merely lingered. Sure, they'd offered support, aid convoys, logistical infrastructure, but actual combat, not a single human warship had entered the fray. Until now. Affirmative, General, responded Admiral Merrick of the Archak Union, his scaled features betraying no emotion. Humanity formally announced its intention to initiate combat operations 10 minutes ago. Corvo rubbed his temples in disbelief. He'd heard rumors of human potential, tales passed around like campfire myths, but he'd always chalked them up to Death Worlder bravado. Now, confronted with the hard truth, he found himself torn between apprehension and a deep, unsettling curiosity. Why now? And more importantly, what exactly were the humans planning to do in a conflict that had dragged on for years? Bring up their first maneuvers, Corvo ordered, his voice sharper than he intended. The holographic display zoomed into the contested systems. The Qadari fleet had entrenched itself behind seemingly impenetrable defense lines across the Kiar stars, daring anyone to challenge them. Human ships began to appear, small, almost insignificant blips on the massive battlefield. As the vessels took form, quiet murmurs passed through the ranks of coalition commanders. The human ships looked nothing like the towering war machines of other civilizations. They were sleek, compact, lacking in grandiose weaponry or intimidating bulk. At a glance, they seemed laughably underpowered. "That's it," someone muttered, doubt thick in their voice. Corvo narrowed his gaze, watching the human fleet arrange into a tight, controlled formation. There was no theatrical display of power, no drawn-out intimidation tactics. To the untrained eye, it looked minimalist. One command ship, a handful of destroyers, a squadron of escort frigates, barely a fraction of what humanity could field, and yet they moved with purpose. The chamber grew tense with anticipation. The Qadari reacted swiftly, repositioning their forces to confront the new arrivals. They didn't see the humans as a legitimate threat. Why would they? No one had broken their lines in years. Then it began. Corvo blinked, barely believing what he saw. The human vessels surged forward with breathtaking precision, gliding through the void like a blade through silk. Within seconds, coalition comms lit up in a frenzy. Electromagnetic interference, widespread sensor disruptions, system blackouts. To the Qadari, it must have felt like being struck blind in the heart of a storm. What are they doing? Admiral Merrick, usually composed, now sounded almost awestruck. Electronic warfare, Corvo answered, though his tone wavered. But on a scale I've never even imagined. The Qadari fleets flailed helplessly, their targeting systems reduced to dead weight. Human ships flickered in and out of view, weaving through the chaos with what seemed like practiced ease. They weren't relying on brute strength. This was something else. This was combat as choreography, violence refined into elegance. "Sir, the Qadari's outer defenses are disintegrating," a communications officer shouted, his eyes wide as cascading streams of data poured in. Corvo leaned forward, drawn to the unfolding scene. Would the humans press their advantage or withdraw? The answer came almost instantly. The human fleet accelerated, exploiting the chaos with frightening precision. Their maneuvers adapted in real time, almost as if they anticipated every Qadari counter. "How are they?" Morak began, trailing off in disbelief as yet another system fell to the human advance. "It's like they know exactly where to strike." Corvo could only watch, equal parts unnerved and amazed. Humanity operated with a level of efficiency that bordered on unnatural. Their approach defied conventional military norms. Where most species overwhelmed their enemies with sheer numbers, the humans employed surgical strikes, crippling vital systems, rendering the enemy fleet helpless, like a beast robbed of its senses. "What kind of weapons are they even using?" Another coalition officer blurted out, both terrified and captivated. "They appear to be standard," a tactical analyst stammered. "But they're wielding them in ways we've never even contemplated." As the minutes ticked by, a stunned silence settled over the command center. An hour had passed since the first human strike, and the once mighty Qadari armadas were in full retreat, shattered and scattered. Not even the Coalition's most hopeful scenarios had imagined anything like this. Corvo stared as the holographic map updated once more. One by one, the Qadari strongholds went dark. This wasn't just a turning point. This wasn't merely a victory. It was the beginning of something far greater. It wasn't just a victory. It was a dismantling. The humans weren't merely overpowering the enemy. They were methodically deconstructing the entire military strategy of the Qadari. Sector Gamma has fallen, the communications officer declared, shattering the heavy silence. And reports confirm 0 human casualties. That's not possible, Morak muttered, his scaled features twitching with disbelief. How can they be taking no losses? Corvo swallowed thickly, his gaze locked onto the tactical display. The human fleet pushed forward with unrelenting momentum, their vessels slipping through wreckage and dodging enemy fire with almost effortless grace. Another Qadari command cruiser exploded into a fiery wreck. It was no longer luck or surprise. It was now obvious. This wasn't just competence. This was something else. They're not just good, Corvo said under his breath. They're on a different plane altogether. What have they been doing all this time if not fighting? He wondered aloud. A new voice answered, cool and analytical. All eyes turned to the doorway, where a human officer stood dressed in a sharp, unadorned uniform. His eyes, calculating and unreadable, scanned the room as though measuring everyone present. You call this a war? He asked, striding into the center of the chamber. To us, it's a simulation, a test of tactical flexibility. The Coalition officers exchanged uneasy glances. The human's tone lacked arrogance. It was purely factual. Corvo clenched his jaw, uncertain whether to feel outraged or grudging respect. What's your aim? Corvo pressed, trying to steady his voice. Why step in now? The human tilted his head slightly, as if trying to explain something so obvious it barely required words. Our goal is to end the conflict as efficiently as possible, he said calmly. And as for the timing, we waited until you were ready to accept our approach. A chill rippled through Corvo. The words were simple, almost harmless, but carried the weight of something far deeper. You think we were ready for this? Morak scoffed. The human's gaze turned to the holomap, where the last fragments of Qadari resistance were being expertly taken apart. If you weren't, he replied without a hint of malice, this war would have ended long ago. Corvo stared at the display, his mind struggling to absorb what was happening. The humans were already deep into Qadari territory, their momentum so overwhelming it bordered on the surreal. And then it hit him, a thought he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. What kind of war had humanity been preparing for all this time? Around him, the Coalition leaders watched in stunned silence as the human fleet advanced. This wasn't combat. It was a masterclass in dissection, the humans identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Status update, Admiral Merrick barked, snapping the room back to attention. What's happening with Qadari Central Command? The tactical officer scanned multiple displays, hands trembling as he spoke. Central Command is collapsing, sir. Their shield grids are disabled, and human boarding pods are en route. Corvo's jaw clenched involuntarily. The Qadari Central Command was a bastion, fortified by layers of defenses that had withstood every attack for years. Now those defenses were crumbling, shattering like brittle glass under an unrelenting assault. Boarding pods? Merrick repeated, a mix of disbelief and horror in his tone. They're entering the station? The nearby human officer gave a single nod. Yes, he said simply. We find precision insertions far more effective than brute force attacks. Our mission is to capture, not destroy. Corvo eyed the human with growing unease. These soldiers weren't the fierce, reckless warriors he had imagined. They were calm, precise, and disturbingly detached from the destruction they were orchestrating. How are they doing this? Another Coalition commander asked, his voice barely steady. We've fought the Qadari for years and barely dented their armor. And now this? Training, the human replied without hesitation. We've trained for this exact scenario, long before we even encountered the Qadari. Space combat, ground operations, electronic warfare. It's all part of the doctrine. Doctrine? Corvo echoed, narrowing his eyes. You make it sound like you expected this war. The human turned fully toward him, his expression still unreadable. Not expected, he said. Anticipated, prepared for, always. His words dropped like a stone into a still pond, sending ripples through the room. The coalition had gone to war out of desperation. The humans, on the other hand, had entered it with the meticulous readiness of those who saw war not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. And now, as Corvo stared at the map, watching the last Qadari strongholds fall, he realized something chilling. The humans hadn't just joined the war. They had finished preparing for the next one. The human fleet was systematically dismantling the Qadari defenses, and Corvo realized this wasn't simply an exhibition of brute force. It was a display of dominance. General Corvo, a voice crackled through the command center's speakers, breaking his concentration. It was one of the coalition's scouts stationed near the Kiter border. The Kiter flagship is on the move. They're attempting to retreat to a more heavily fortified zone. Let me guess, Marak said, sarcasm dripping from his tone. The humans already saw this coming. The human officer remained unfazed. Naturally, they'll permit the flagship to withdraw, for now. It's an age-old strategy. Drive the enemy into their final stronghold, give them a false sense of safety, then eliminate even that. Corvo was stunned. You're toying with them, he said, incredulous. Not playing, the human officer corrected, voice flat and emotionless. We're ensuring that when they fall completely. No recovery, no regrouping. This war dragged on because everyone else fought in fragments. We don't. Corvo turned back to the display, watching Qadari fleet scramble to adjust. Panic was evident. The humans had shattered the unspoken conventions of warfare, operating with a sophistication the Qadari had never faced. As more sectors fell, it became clear the Qadari weren't just losing, they were unraveling. We're receiving reports of planetary incursions, the tactical officer announced, eyes wide with disbelief. The humans have deployed troops to critical Qadari worlds. Morak hissed lowly. How are they already launching ground operations? We've barely secured space control. The human officer, arms folded, eyes fixed on the map, responded, simultaneous campaigns. While our fleets disrupt and dismantle enemy forces in orbit, ground teams secure vital positions. We train to dominate on all fronts, at once. Corvo felt a sickening weight settle in his stomach. Every coalition campaign had been linear, space first, then land. The humans, however, seemed to manage both seamlessly, their operations unfolding with an efficiency that bordered on unnatural. Ground update coming in, the comms officer whispered, clearly shaken. The humans have disabled the Qadari planetary defenses. There's barely any resistance. Corvo could hardly believe it. The Qadari planets were fortresses, shielded and heavily fortified. Coalition forces had spent months, even years, trying to penetrate them with minimal success. Now, the humans were seizing them in a matter of hours. What kind of troops are these? Someone murmured, voicing the silent question in everyone's mind. Our soldiers are adaptive, the human officer replied, his tone suggesting it should be obvious. We train them to do more than fight. They analyze, adjust, and exploit in real time. Silence fell over the room as the coalition leaders absorbed his words. The humans had refined war into a science, where triumph relied not on overwhelming strength, but on surgical precision. It was terrifying. What's their next target? Corvo asked, even though part of him didn't want the answer. The flagship, the human officer answered immediately. They'll allow it to escape, then block every possible route back. Once isolated, Qadari leadership will have no option but to surrender or be eliminated. So that's it? Merrick asked, eyes wide. They're already planning the endgame? Planning? The human officer raised an eyebrow, a faint, almost amused smile playing on his lips. No, they're executing it. This war ended the moment we arrived. Around him, the coalition commanders exchanged uneasy stares. It wasn't just the humans' tactics or weapons that disturbed them. It was their absolute control. It was their mindset that set them apart. They treated war like a formula, each component measured, every outcome predicted with precision. The command room grew silent once more as the humans advanced. Qadari-controlled systems began vanishing from the star map, one after the other, like fading constellations in an endless night. The holographic interface now displayed the Qadari flagship in retreat, pulling back to its final bastion, pursued not by a chaotic onslaught, but by a cold, methodical force. What if they surrender? Corvo asked, almost afraid to hear the reply. The human officer's eyes narrowed slightly. Then they live, he answered flatly. Our mission isn't annihilation. It's victory, complete and undeniable. A warning so clear that no one dares oppose us again. Corvo gave a slow nod, swallowing hard. There was a harsh clarity to it, a kind of ruthless logic unlike anything he had ever witnessed in war. The humans hadn't just come to win. They came to redefine what it meant to win. As the map shifted again, showing the Qadari's last fortress on the verge of collapse, Corvo couldn't shake the sense that this was just the prologue to something far greater, and he had no idea what that future held. The room was thick with tension as the hologram revealed the final moments of the human offensive. The once feared Qadari flagship, once a symbol of unstoppable might, now appeared feeble, damaged, and faltering as it limped toward its final fallback zone. Its hull was shredded from prior attacks, engines stuttering, and its elite guard ships reduced to shattered fragments scattered across the void. Corvo looked around the command center. Coalition officers sat in stunned silence, some awestruck, others visibly anxious. But all were transfixed by humanity's surgical strategy. Just 5 hours ago, the Qadari had seemed invincible. Now, defeat was no longer just possible, it was unavoidable. The human fleet is closing in on the flagship's fallback point, reported the tactical officer, his voice unsteady, as if the scene before him defied logic. They've sealed off the entire sector. No exit paths remain. Any sign of Qadari reinforcements? Corvo asked, though he already suspected the answer. None, sir. The humans already severed their supply chains and reserves, the officer responded, shaking his head in disbelief. It's over. They have no escape left. Corvo watched as the human fleet formed an exact perimeter around the Qadari's last refuge. There were no declarations, no demands, just silence. Their presence alone made a statement. There is no escape. The human officer, standing calmly among the coalition's leadership, tilted his head. We've sent surrender conditions, he announced. The Qadari have 5 minutes to respond. If they don't comply, we proceed with final neutralization. Mar growled softly, his eyes locked on the display. And if they don't surrender? He asked, barely hiding his disdain. You'll just eliminate them? The human officer didn't flinch. If they reject the terms, yes, he said evenly. But understand, destruction isn't our aim. Resolution is. We seek an end so absolute it leaves no room for continuation. Corvo felt a tightening in his chest. The humans operated by a completely different set of rules. For them, war wasn't about glory or valor. It was about closure, decisive and permanent. In their hands, war became a tool of design to mold the galaxy into a state where resistance was simply illogical. The Qadari flagship is responding, the communications officer interrupted, tension in his voice. They're requesting terms. A wave of murmurs swept through the command room. Could it really be ending? After all these years? Put it on, Corvo commanded, trying to maintain composure despite the surreal atmosphere. The display shifted to reveal the bridge of the Qadari vessel. Their commander appeared on screen, eyes blazing with a mix of fury and desperation. His once regal uniform was in disarray, the image of power reduced to a flicker of panic. We acknowledge your conditions, human, he spat, his voice trembling. But know this, your victory came through deception and cunning, not strength. The human officer stepped forward, his face unreadable. You lost because you clung to ancient tactics, centuries past relevance, he replied calmly. Strength lies in adaptability. In understanding the complete picture of conflict, we offered you a peaceful resolution long ago. You chose otherwise. The Qadari leader glared back, pride hanging by a thread. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse, might burn everything out of sheer defiance. But then he glanced at his own crew, the weight of reality settling in. They were surrounded, stripped of all advantage. The galaxy was watching. Very well, he muttered, lowering his head. We surrender. Shock rippled through the room. Just like that, it was over. Years of relentless war, countless lives lost, innumerable resources wasted, and it had all ended within 5 hours of humanity entering the fight. The silence that followed was deafening. Transmission confirmed, the communications officer said quietly, as though speaking it aloud would make it real. The Qadari have ordered a full ceasefire. The human officer gave a simple nod and turned to the coalition leaders. The war is officially over, he said. Our fleet will begin stabilizing Qadari territory. Coalition forces may withdraw to their own sectors. Corvo opened his mouth, but words escaped him. It was surreal. The Qadari weren't defeated through years of attrition, but by a single surgical campaign. Humanity had accomplished in mere hours what the rest of the galaxy couldn't do in decades. And more than that, they had changed the entire nature of war. How? Corvo finally whispered. How do you prepare for something like this, ending a war so quickly? The human officer regarded him with calm detachment. We come from a world where conflict is part of our nature, he said. Survival forced us to evolve, to adapt, to innovate, and to end threats conclusively. War isn't our purpose. It's a tool to forge a peace no one dares to disturb. Corvo slowly nodded, absorbing every word. This wasn't just about strength. It was about clarity, preparation, precision. Humanity had trained their minds, refined their methods, and embraced an efficiency so pure it felt alien. They hadn't just participated in the war. They had transcended it. They showed that true victory isn't won by endurance, but by intelligence. As the coalition officers dispersed, Corvo's eyes lingered on the human fleet regrouping in the display. They moved with the same focused discipline as during the battle, now shifting to stabilization and rebuilding. They weren't conquerors basking in triumph. They were strategists, already laying the groundwork for what came next. And for the first time in years, Corvo felt a strange sense of hope, laced with fear. Humanity had revealed its full potential, and the galaxy would never be the same. They hadn't just won a war, they had rewritten its rules, and in doing so, paved the way for a peace that might truly endure. The war hadn't ended with a grand spectacle, but with the realization that humanity had always known exactly how and when to win.